Good evening and welcome to today's book presentation of the new English edition of your Comrade Avreml Broide, A Worker's Life Story by Ben Gold, as the book's translator Annie Sommer Kaufman and the theater artist Jenny Romaine discuss this 1944 working-class coming-of-age Yiddish novel that traces the family origin, immigration, and radicalization of an everyman named Avreml Broide. We are delighted to have you join us tonight at Stavros Niarchos Foundation Library, the flagship branch of the New York Public Library System. My name is Ali Weitzman, and I'm a librarian at this branch, World Languages Collection, and I will be your host this evening. Before I introduce tonight's speakers, I would like to thank the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for making this evening programs possible. I would also like to remind everyone that if you don't already have a library card, it is easy to get one by visiting any information desk in our building or by speaking with one of my colleagues just outside this room after the program. Additionally, I would like to encourage you to visit the New York Public Library's website and take a look at other upcoming 7 Stories Up programs. We have an excellent lineup. We would love to have you join us again in this space. And a few words about tonight's presenters. Annie Sommer Kaufman is a Yiddish translator and teacher based in Chicago. Annie worked for a decade in the garment industry as a pattern maker, including in the New York City. She was a founding member of Red Emma's bookstore in Baltimore and has been organizing with the Jewish Voice for Peace in many capacities for a dozen years. She's a Svar-trained Talmud teacher and runs the Lace Midrash in Chicago. Jenny Romaine is a director, designer, and puppeteer, and co-founder of the Obie-winning visual theater collective Great Small Works. She's a music director of Jennifer Miller's Circus Amok and a lead artist with the Naming the Lost COVID Memorials project. She was the first recipient of the Adrian Cooper Award for Dreaming in Yiddish in 2014 and received a Risk Taker Award from Jews for Racial and Economic Justice in 2015. So without further ado, I would like to welcome our esteemed presenters to the podium.
Hooray! We made it to this day. Yay!
Hooray!
It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you and with this remarkable person.
Hi, Jenny.
And translator who's done this amazing, immense, classy and stylish translation. Oh, can you see me okay? Let me move this. Of this memoir, this interesting literary work. And we're going to chat a little about the book and Annie's process, and then we'll open it up for questions at the end. So, to begin with, we read your marvelous biography. Can you believe she did all that stuff? And she's only 15. It's like, I don't know how she did it. But anyway, one of the things we want to talk about tonight is why would you want to read this book? Mm-hmm. And, well, one of the reasons I think is that if a lot of us purchase it, there'll be an audio book, and we get to hear the maestra here read the book, which I think would be fantastic. So that's my personal goal in buying 20 to 30 copies myself. And I want to give a shout out to Wayne State University Press, who put this book out, and they've put out a lot of other amazing books and have unbelievable archives at Wayne State University. So huge shout out to them. And so one thing, just to get us rolling, about why we should read this book, Annie said to me, because we need to stay in relationship to these organizers that this book is about, that our government really tried to cut our ties to. And that one of the ways we can rekindle those relationships is through aesthetics, through thinking and studying and looking at imagery from William Gropper, which feeds our imaginations. And we need their influence because we're facing a lot of really tough stuff, and they were really tough people. So Annie says to me, she says, I want this New York City visit to be like that homecoming party when Avreml gets released from prison. What does that mean?
That means that he got paraded through the streets, and that's really after prison is when, at the very end of the book, the book is mostly about how Avreml becomes a fully realized communist, a fully realized American, and a fully realized hero. And that final, merit badge is from his incarceration. It's how he earns it. And also by proudly declaring all of the heroic things that he's done for his people, for his class, to protect them, that are considered crimes by the city of New York.
Such as when people getting evicted, putting all their stuff back in their apartment buildings.
Yeah.
Such as organizing a general strike to ensure that there's a 40-hour work week.
Going to the German consulate to protest the Nazi government and their treatment of Jews.
And prefigurative hunger marches that demanded that the government support people who were starving in D.C. and, all kinds of things that later became Social Security, and, they really were prefigurative. But Annie, let's roll back.
Yeah.
And just
Start
talk
at the beginning.
Yes, talk. When did this book come out? Who wrote it? Et cetera.
Good. So it was published in 1944. I do not know when Ben Gold wrote this book because it ends during the Spanish Civil War, around 36. And even that seems like a tacked on finale. But mostly it seems like Gold was trying to set the story and the celebration of the Great Strike of 1926, which is when the whole garment industry threatened a general strike in order to make the fur workers strike for their 40-hour work week successful. So that was after all the generations of labor organizers demanding the 40-hour work week, which is how, that was the same campaign that the Haymarket martyrs died for 30 years before. Finally, that first contract was the Furriers Union in New York City, and it was because the communists had the most ambitious demands. So Ben Gold was the president of that union and was very proud of that accomplishment and that strike. And coincidentally or not, they were very explicit as a Jewish union in conflict with Jewish employers that they needed the 40-hour work week so that they could have a 2-day work weekend and keep Shabbos. So that seems, and I'll also say in the context of the publisher of this novel, which was the daily Yiddish communist newspaper of New York City, the Morgen Freiheit, they were really committed to honoring that strike. So they would do Jubilee editions of, it's been 10 years since the Great Strike of 1926. It's been 15 years since the Great Strike of 1926. And I have seen in the archives where they're nudging Ben Gold to write something in celebration and in honor of that strike. So I think that's part of what the project of this novel is. But I can't answer all of why Gold turned to the literary arts in his maturity. He was probably 44 when this came out, and he was still very busy running the union during the war.
The introduction to the book is really fascinating too, because you bring in your own connection to this, like why you would be interested, and you use this term when I read your introduction. You say that the writing of this book, it has two parts that are very different from each other, and so you're talking about this lineage between the writer and the main character in the book, and you say that they're practicing pasichta so well. What do you mean by that?
Okay, so I don't know that Ben Gold is explicitly planning this book. I don't know that he planned this book or if he just started writing and whatever came out is what came out. But there is a fun literary technique in the rabbinic tradition to have a point you want to make, like celebrating the great fur workers' strike of 1926, and you start your speech about something else. And it's not clear how that something else at the beginning of your speech is going to inform what's your takeaway, but you start it there and then you show off how sophisticated you are to tie together these different texts. So the first half of this novel is a completely different book than the New York book. And for me, part of the excitement of reading it as a full novel is to try to connect the dots between the part in the old country in Bessarabia, where Avreml is a youth and kind of a peripheral character. The portrait of the community that he comes from is, I would say his father is the more consistent and stronger character. But it doesn't even open with his father. It opens with a character named Burke, who has earned the name Burke Blizzard because of the way he yells. And in the review that the editor of the Freiheit wrote, he connects that great, fiery, righteous orator who opens the novel as being the most Ben Gold character in the book.
Ben Gold was renowned, like, for standing on soapboxes and speaking in the garment district and being a super compelling speaker to listen to. But would you be kind enough to read?
Oh, I thought you'd never ask.
What page are we looking at? Page 63. No, wrong. Page 11.
11, coming up. So this is Burke Blizzard, who is furious because his brother has recently died because he was so exploited by his landlord, who was also his boss, which right there, that's a good lesson. It's bad enough to have a landlord. It's bad enough to have a boss. It shouldn't be the same person. But Nachman Leib was both of these roles to Burke's brother Fivish. So on the other side of the street, across from Nachman Leib's beautiful house, a collection of market stalls displayed themselves. Rachel Burke Blizzard, that's Burke's wife, whose name is Rachel. Her stall stood exactly across from Nachman Leib's front porch. That's how Burke's hollers earned their reputation in town.
She sold candy. Sorry.
And bagels and little, it's very cute. Okay, as soon as Nachman Leib appeared on the porch, Burke took to his yelling. There he is, the bloodsucker! You'll be punished for working my brother to death. Robber! Murderer! Homicidal maniac! You won't be forgiven! Or he would shriek, just look at him, a pillar of the community. He should be sent to Siberia. He sent my brother right into his grave. Leech! Bloodsucker! You should get cholera in your bones. The more he cursed Nachman Leib, the more his voice increased in its rage and shrillness. And he continued to yell like that until Nachman Leib went back into his house. The street and even the whole town enjoyed how Berka Blizzard was giving the percentnik what he deserved. Even though Berka's voice perforated their brains till they could hardly stand it, they found consolation in the fact that somebody was voicing out loud the rage they had felt themselves and was taking on Nachman Leib's plundering of the town's poor. When Berka called the usurer a thief, a murderer, a bloodsucker, people said it right along with him, some under their breath, some out loud. You said it, Berka. And how? You give it to him, Berka. Keep at it. Scream for all of us. And this is Bill Gropper's illustration of Berka Blizzard. Ooh.
And I thank you.
Yeah.
Great reading, great text. And you can hear the Yiddish underneath a lot of it. And it's can't wait to read it in Yiddish, but we're so grateful for you for purveying it to us in English. And I don't know about you, but some of those images like bloodsucker and da-da-da-da, like right now in the current environment we're in with like sort of anti-Semitic stuff creeping in around the edges. It's like, what do you make of that, Annie? Like the use of that kind of language. I mean, he is talking about a local usurer in town, but
yeah, I think it's good to recognize when those terms are misused against Jews only. And I don't think we're in a time of anti-Semitism around the edges. It's pretty explicit and having a lot of effects. But what is remarkable about entering in Ben Gold's world and New York 20th century Jewish communities is that comprehensively, this was a community of Jewish leftists, and they were in conflict with each other. So amongst the left, there was the left and the right in conflict, and then across class, the Jewish fur workers were working for Jewish fur business owners. And the promise of how the American dream worked in the fur industry was that you should come, you should get a job in a fur shop. They were a few blocks south, 30th to 26th Street, the fur district. And then if you could save enough money, you could get your own fur shop, your own machine, and then you could be the boss, and then you could have some Jewish workers. And so that class conflict and that exploitation was happening within, like, Jew on Jew exploitation. And what I think I like about that is that it can be an explicit attack on the wage system more than an ethnic, exceptional, only some people in America act this way, or only some people, like only America is capitalist. This is also the dynamics that's happening in the old country.
So here we are. We've heard from the old country, and then that's the first half of the book. Avreml has to leave town.
Does he?
Does he have to?
This is not. I went to the Tenement Museum yesterday. I've really been enjoying my time in the city. Thank you very much. And the tour guide made a very clear. Immigrants came to America because they had everything was terrible in Europe. There was pogroms, it was poverty, it was oppression, and that's true. Like, I don't want to contradict her and the stats, but that is not what is written in this novel.
Bad breakup.
I mean, this is just like a teenage kid who can't talk to his girlfriend, and so he runs away. And it's just like, I think it's such a choice that Gold is making. He needs to get Avreml to America, and he's telling a compelling economic story in the old country. But it's not he has to come to America because the Tsar sent him.
Oh, yeah. I was thinking more of like a 400-pound gangster being after him, or
oh, yeah, that is true.
the bad breakup. When I said had to, I meant like was being propelled by forces that weren't just imperial.
I think narratively he had to because Gold's writing a story about New Yorkers for New Yorkers.
So he washes up on the shores of this joint, and he's working in factories, and it's pretty darn bleak.
Oh, it's terrible.
It's like it's some of the we don't see that many scenes of in the shop, even though everybody who's in this is a worker. We hear a lot about them outside of their hours at the shop, but everybody's putting in their long days. Could you read? Because just talk about this as a novel about immigration and what it means to become American in this story.
Yeah. So, Avreml hates being in New York, hates working in the fur shop, and he gets advice to go to a union meeting. And he's like, I don't really know what that's going to do for the fact that everything sucks here, but sure, I'll go to the union meeting, which is at Cooper Union Hall. And the speaker there is Mayor London. But then after the meeting, when he leaves, this is how he's feeling. Avreml had experienced everything the speaker said as so clear, so elemental. It was only natural that the workers should absorb his words in a still tension and applaud him so fervently. How would it even be possible not to be in agreement with such a speech and with such people? He recalled how he himself had suddenly stopped feeling like a stranger among the workers, and how his loneliness completely disappeared, and he had become his own person, just like the people sitting around him. He felt embraced by a queer warmth and a closeness toward all of them. He had an urge to scream out his joy, but together with the others, he squeezed out the joy into hand clapping, and the clapping lifted him even higher, making it seem even more like a holiday. So this is America, he thought. This is what Morris was talking about. Workers' meetings, unions, freedom, equality, brotherhood, socialism. It's wonderful. His muscles tightened with a swelling energy. He could sense his blood flowing hotly through his veins. It seemed like he was truly seeing the world in its full light. Everything looked brand new to him, as if he were seeing it for the very first time. He understood now that America wasn't at all what he had thought. Now he freshly understood that America was, as the speaker had said, not only a new land, but also a continuation of a great beginning, and that it would lead to tremendous developments, and everything depended on the workers. Avreml's resentment of America vanished. So did his homesickness for his little hometown. He could tell that in this new America he had become a new man, completely unlike the Avreml of yesterday. Tomorrow, yes, tomorrow morning, he thought, I'm going to go up to Morris in the shop and tell him softly but firmly, Mr. Morris, I've made my peace with Columbus's country. I've found the way.
Beautiful. So here he is, walking down the street, seeing everything with different colored glasses now, not thinking about the 400-pound gangster or his ex-girlfriend. We had talking about New York as a character in this book. Is there anything you'd like to mention? We had listed a couple places that appear here. You listed Cooper Union. Then, of course, there are the offices of the Communist Party that were on East 12th Street, 2 blocks south of Union Square, and another headquarters, 28 East 14th Street. What other landmarks? Oh, the Fur District.
Yeah, the Fur District is great. I love that it's these 4 blocks it's contained, and you do get a sense in this novel about the energy there and the fact that everyone's in it together. They're all working in these very small little shops, but they know what's happening on the street, and they meet in a main meeting point to make some decisions, and that like the gangsters come and the strikes and the pickets. It's all very contained. I'll say my experience today of being in New York and feeling this book was the policeman on the big black horse. That's what I felt today. That is in a scene in this book that has an illustration, and there are stickers available with this illustration. In the real world, the fur workers' contract of 1926 did not get well enforced, and so they had to go on strike again in 27 to keep that 40-hour work week. And that was a super violent strike. And this is Gropper's illustration from that strike. And yeah, that was part of my New York City experience today, was that threat of police violence. Yeah.
Yeah, the book is full of violence.
Yeah.
In many forms.
Mm-hmm.
And there was something you said about the horse. Oh, about Gropper. If we could just pause for a moment and talk about William Gropper. Who here is familiar with the work of William Gropper? If you're familiar, could you raise your hand? All right, William Gropper knowers. Both of us had not yet seen the Gropper chartreuse light.
Mm.
And the drawings in this book are incredible. And there are stickers on offer, I heard, of the illustrations from the book. You can have one after the show. But Gropper has an amazing story. Do you feel like talking a little bit about, and how would he have come to have illustrated this book?
Well, the short answer is that he was staff illustrator at the Morgan Freiheit. So they were just like this team. And Ben Gold was, I don't know if this was like really took up any of his time, but he was the president of the Morgan Freiheit Association, which was like the political wing of the newspaper, a membership organization that published the newspaper. Gold, apparently, in his memoirs, he describes that he wrote this when he was home with the flu.
Pandemic book.
There was a flu, and it was a pandemic translation too. So he, against his doctor's order, and when he was not on the clock for the fur workers, he wrote this novel, and then he showed it to an editor at the newspaper. And then once, the newspaper wants to be upholding Ben Gold. Anything that Ben Gold touched turns to something very popular. And the Freiheit had two staff illustrators, Bill Gropper, who was trying to get out of the business, and Yossel Cutler, who illustrated a Freiheit published book the next year.
Modernist, subject of a different talk, but big fans of Yossel Cutler here.
Yeah. See the Munter Gang show if you ever get a chance. It's phenomenal. Changed my life.
So Gropper, but also his favorite auntie when he was a kid, perished in the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire. She jumped to her death. And I think that radicalized him. Like, it made it very clear for him what the stark terms were and what was at stake.
Mm-hmm.
And so
and he worked in the garment industry too, as a child. Yeah.
Yeah. And he ended up getting called before the House Un-American Activities Committee. And we'll talk about some of the ramifications of these people's toughness in a minute. The next thing, right, we were talking about how it's not all pretty. And in conversation, Annie's very interesting. If you ever get a chance to study or talk to Annie, it's kind of incredible. And Annie said in this question, like, one thing that's on her mind is, what do you do when your comrades are your enemies? What do you mean by that?
Well, this is, how we just heard all this gratitude to Morris for introducing Avreml to the Union? Yes?
Oh, yes, I remember that.
Well, it turns out that Morris is one of these cats who goes and buys a factory and is now a boss and tries to sell Avreml on how that's good and like socialism is a thing for the fantasy for the distant future, but for now, I'll just be a boss and I won't be such a bad boss. And then he ends up scabbing the strike, and appeals to Avreml not to turn him into the Union out of like old time loyalty, and really like tricks him because Avreml cares about this man. And that becomes a huge vulnerability, and it's bad for the strike. And so Avreml confesses that betrayal to the Union and kind of gets put on trial by his comrades for the crime of helping his friend out, which was a betrayal of the strike and his like real comrades. So there's all this confusion about, which side are you on, and is friendship good for the movement? And Gold's lesson explicitly is no, friendship is not good for the movement. And similar thing happens.
Right, because part of his rehab from having feelings of generosity towards this person is he has to go to a workers' school, and which was also right near Union Square, and many amazing people taught there. And he met his wife there, and the wife's father offered him all these posh options of this and that, but Avreml's like, nope, that's not my interest.
I'm going to be a worker.
And anyway, would you read? This is sort of another development of, like the idea of who is the enemy.
So Avreml's wife, Miriam, is a member of this Lovestone faction. Have you ever heard of the Lovestone faction? All right.
Lovestones.
Yeah. They were not in Avreml's faction. So they had to break up. Avreml didn't want to. He wanted everybody to get along. And so he let Miriam convince him that they were going to reunite. The Lovestonites with the main Communist Party. And they went to a meeting, but then she gave a speech at the meeting that was very agitational, provocative, and bad for the movement. So then Avreml goes home, sat down at his desk, and wrote, "Dear Miriam, this evening in your speech at your meeting, you said that a true communist must stay loyal to their ideals and principles, even when they must pay the highest price for them. I agree with you. Therefore, you'll understand why I'm leaving you. If I continued on with this life, I would be acting like a coward and a hypocrite. I would end up hating myself, and I would stop loving you. It's going to be very hard for me to live without you, but I can't live under one roof with you, a party enemy. If you decide to leave the traitors, I'll come running back to you. If not, you'll have to forget about me. Thank you, Miriam, for the beautiful sunny days and the great joy you brought to my life from the first day I met you. It's a shame our great joy has been ruined, but there is no other way. Avreml." And that was a very important choice that he had to make on his way to becoming that fully realized communist hero.
I guess they hadn't heard of that, or I guess they had a different take on the personal is political.
Yeah, no, he writes very explicitly that the personal is political, and the personal is a threat to the political.
Because you mentioned in your introduction that one of the strongest things your mother talked about with you in this was the feminist move to challenge that.
Well, there is agreement in those generations from the 40s to the 60s that the personal is political, but there's a question about, is that does that help the political or does that threaten the political? So it makes sense to me that that next generation would say, no, the personal is strengthens the political because we're in this for each other. We care about each other. We have to know each other, support each other, and that is our political power. Whereas in this generation and in this gender, it's more, I care about you, and therefore, like there's that competition. If I care about you, this individual person, then maybe I'm caring less about the union, less about my party.
Well, there was one other thing we just wanted to talk about, the intended audience for this text. It was written in
Yiddish.
right? And like for people who lived in the coops, maybe?
Maybe.
And could you explain what the coops are or were?
Yeah. The coops are cooperative housing in the Bronx. Pretty sure Ben Gold lived there and with a lot of his comrades. I recently watched the documentary about them at home in Utopia, and my favorite part was the basements of these apartment buildings were all meeting rooms and libraries and dance halls. And so
and film production studios and a dairy and and every apartment had sunlight streaming through the windows. Like that was the mandatory thing. If you're going to vision it, it had to be human centric.
So you're working with your comrades in the Fur District in the 20s. Then you get on the train to the coops. You probably talk with them about union business on the way up. And then you go to a meeting about the building or in your study group for your Marxist-Leninist economic theory, or you're in the choir, and so you have a choir rehearsal. The full social life.
But in fact, it was so powerful that they gerrymandered a split in the middle of the apartment complex to break up the voting block in the Bronx because the activities of the people didn't stop in their apartments. So rent strikes and all this kind of stuff. I just like hearing about it because I feel like the people are so militant and they're so clear about when something is not right, calling it out and backing that up. And I feel like this may be, I know we're coming maybe to a point where we want to open it up to the audience, but in talking about why this book is relevant now and why it's important to talk about these folks and their organizing.
Well, I really enjoy this book. I think it's fun to read. That's one reason to read it. I have some feelings of loss around like cultural loss, the lifestyle I just described about those really thick relationships and lifestyles of really comprehensive cultural and social life, but also material loss about like who's working a union contract on a 40-hour work week right now. Not, I don't assume that. And that's a big loss. And so I want to connect to, I think, both of those, the cultural and the material lineages and assumptions and lifestyles here. I don't want all of it. Like, I don't want that concept of we're not allowed to have interpersonal commitments. I don't want the loyalty to the state that they have. But Gold and his union had to do a lot of obeying party directives. Sometimes that was counterintuitive to them as American union organizers or as Jews. So I'd like to just like talk with my comrades about what we like here and what we don't. But this is our heritage. And there are reasons that we haven't been learning it. Some of it is like just passively on assimilation, and some of it is very active repression that the bosses don't want us to read it.
But also, I mean, you had mentioned also about your own father and in your own family that this affected you, this legacy of, the backlash against this effective organizing.
Well, right. I mean, it's not a coincidence. Like, my father raised me very clearly, when I was a small child. So in simplistic ways, bosses bad, workers good. And he didn't want me to have like doubts about that. His training was in history, and his plan was to be a professor of history. There was a pretty comprehensive blacklist when he was going into the trade in the 80s. So that didn't happen. And he ended up teaching at the business school because the business schools were more accepting of seeing society in terms of bosses and workers. But that's the kind of lesson, that consistent political orientations can shape lives. And there were some really hard years there.
And in reading more about Ben Gold, and when they did have to, he did prison time for these hunger strikes, and in DC, like they were interracial organizing. They were with Dorothy Day and others. They were really badly beaten, spent time in jail, and where he was radicalized around race relations in the United States.
And if you want to read about those episodes, he has a short story called Prison Time. My translation of it was newly published in Ingeveb like a week or two ago. That's a fun story.
And what Annie does so beautifully is she not only translates the material, but she really sets you up to understand what you're looking at. And I feel so grateful to you for that, because it's such wonderful teaching and making things accessible. But there's the dignity. There's the dignity around, like, whenever you, at the end of the book, too, he is being condemned. I can't remember which time it is that he's being sent to jail. Oh, it's right before they're about to, well, we have to read the book to understand it. But the dignity, like they start saying these things to him, like, you did this, you did that, you did this, you did that. And he's like, yes, I did.
Yes, I did.
Because I saw people starving to death in front of my eyes. Because and the dignity, also in the House Un-American Activities Committee transcripts. I just was so moved by that, the principle.
Yeah. Yeah, and when I think, a lot of leaders in the labor movement didn't have that. They would collaborate with the bosses. That was the communist critique on the socialists here, especially. The Forward newspaper. I mean, the Forward newspaper is named explicitly as an enemy in this book because they're much more deferential to their advertisers, to the business owners. And then you get like the AFL-CIO kicking out the fur workers and the miners, like these founding unions for the CIO, but during Taft-Hartley and the expulsion of the communist unions, they were deferring to the government and pushing out their most effective organizers. So the two unions, I think it wasn't the miners, I can't remember what the other union was. It's in the introduction. The two unions that got fired from the CIO then were the two unions that had won wage increases that year. That's just like, what is really your goal? Like that accommodationist impulse when you're in an adversary orientation to the employers and to the government just doesn't get you the goods.
Or does it?
Maybe.
Or do we have Social Security, and do we have a 40-hour work week? These are the questions.
These are the questions
that we can talk about when we read this book. And now I think we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. Thank you so much, Annie.
Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, New York Public Library.
We have a microphone floating around, so please raise your hand, and I am right here.
Yes. Did Ben Gold have any opinions about Zionism? And what were they?
Yeah. So these are the burning questions of our day. And something that is challenging with these loyal party members is it's hard to know their own personal opinions. So I have a lot of questions about Zionism and its role in American politics. So I've been looking to answer this question for my own purposes. It's certainly not a part of this book. I think, during this time, when this was published in 1944, it's pretty clear that Zionism is kind of like ruling class nachas, like that's not what is live for in these unions. But after the war and when partition is on the table, things start changing really fast. And Ben Gold, as the president of the Morgan Freiheit Association, has his name on a policy paper that came out in 1946, I think, opposing partition because that is a scheme of the British Empire and really what is necessary for the working class is Jewish-Arab unity. After partition, it changes really fast, and he's not in an international stature at that time because he's dealing with Taft-Hartley. And he is up against perjury charges by the FBI that takes him through to the Supreme Court through 1954 and finally out of union leadership. So I think like the way to answer that question is through other publications. It's not going to be through Ben Gold's publications. What is the Freiheit saying? I've seen stuff in Jewish Life, which is what became Jewish Currents. I think you should tell me after and we'll go to the next question. But I think part of my takeaway is like a lot of people are asking me about Zionism and this book because it is the most pressing question of our day. And I think there have been generations of American Jews, especially progressive American Jews, who have avoided this conversation. And so it's part of why we're in such crisis now. Okay, Ellie's got questions. Thank you.
How did you discover this novel?
Yeah, that's a fun
The
story.
question was, how did Annie discover this novel?
I don't know. It was like super beshert. I knew that I wanted to participate in the Yiddish Book Center's translation fellowship, so I was looking for something that fit my interests, my skills, and that I liked enough to spend this kind of time with, and that hadn't been translated before. And there was a book by Ben Gold on my bookshelf. I don't know how it got there. And I looked him up, and he was just a very compelling person. I read the first few pages of that book. I really liked the writing style. And then I saw that he had written more books and checked out his first. This is his first novel, and just was so taken with it.
think we're going to use the microphone
Yeah,
so we
so-
get it on the recording.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. The microphone's working. Hoping. Yeah, Jewish Currents had a great article, by the way, about the Zionism question, about how the CP 448 was anti-Zionist and it switched partially because the Soviet Union demanded it. I had a question. So he wrote it in Yiddish. You don't really know when he wrote it, but let's say it was published in 44. I don't know that history very well. So I was just thinking, like, the choice to write in Yiddish in the 40s, you know, I'm kind of surprised by that in a way. I always got the idea, you know, obviously people were speaking Yiddish at home, but did he, you know, people were switching toward English. The fact he chose to write it in Yiddish in the 40s, was that surprising? You know this stuff way better than I do, so I'd love for you to speak to that.
Yeah, I think that's part of the question of for whom did he write this book and for whom did the Freiheit publish it. And so I think it's for these union members and for veterans of this movement. The explicit dedication of the novel is to the needle trades workers who fell in Spain. In 44, there's a transition in American Yiddish from native-born speakers who are really the elders because immigration was cut off in 1924, and there was kind of a clarification that they were going to have to invest in some instruction for Yiddish. And then it's before there was a real refugee population to replenish the Yiddish speaking and to become the teachers for the next generations. So he's writing this for his own people, his own peers, and he kept writing in Yiddish. So what surprises me more than that he wrote this one in 44 in Yiddish is that he was writing in the 60s in Yiddish. His last novel, I think, was published in 74, and that came out in two versions, a Yiddish and an English. But for him to publish in English meant that he had to have a translator, which he did for his memoirs. I highly 1,000% recommend reading his memoirs. He's so informative and so funny, very good at holding a grudge, very good at sarcastic writing, and it's a great window into what it's like to be a super righteous union president.
I understand she has the microphone, so could we come here afterwards? Yes. Great.
Okay, I was wondering why in the book the first part is in the shtetl, and then he comes here, but he never connects to his parents again. And I know, it's different from now where people can just call home and everyone has a cell phone, but still a lot of families, my family, his family, maintained a connection. But were there also a lot of families that completely cut off from each other once some of the members came here?
I don't know how to answer that statistically or sociologically. It surprises me a lot in this novel that Ben Gold does not only does he not write to his family, but he doesn't think about them or talk about them as is included in the narrative. That's not true of Ben Gold. Ben Gold is from one of these families where the daddy comes first and then sends for his family later. So they did have that continuity across the ocean, and he stayed close with his family. But it's part of that question about how, like, as readers, it's on us to connect. What are the themes in the first part of the book that are informing the second part? I think there's a lot of parallels, but this is something Jenny and I talked a lot about, the parallels between his father and himself, about their spiritual awakening, about their discipline, about
They both did prison time.
their masculinity. It's there are gangsters in both parts. I think this is for the students who are writing book reports about this novel, is to connect those dots for us. And it's something about that cutting off of relationships theme. But it's surprising to me, too.
Okay. What I was wondering was what was their connection? Because all during this time, Stalin was now running Russia, and I doubt that he had some of the same ideas that Ben Gold had in terms of the way he treated the populace. And was their philosophical connection around communism, was that going back to Lenin? I wanted to hear a little bit about that in terms of what inspired them to continue with the Communist Party.
I can tell you my opinion, which I think is that the Communist Party in the United States was the best option for the labor movement, for anti-racist organizing, for building like a party system that could intervene in the business control of the American government. And within that, like, some positive sense of internationalism that these immigrants really needed. There was definitely disagreements with Stalin, that pact with the Nazi government in 1939, that was rough. A lot of people left the party then. Gold was, I think, really committed to loyalty and really avoidant of admitting mistakes. But I can't speak for him. Jenny, you got stuff on that?
No, I have to read the memoir.
You do, but it's not in there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great question.
It's a great question.
Who has a mic? Okay.
We got it in the back.
I have a question. Obviously, I haven't read the book yet, but a couple things that have come up have kind of made me think about other kinds of political and aesthetic commitments that might have been in the background to this. Like, for example, you mentioned that, he ends a romantic relationship because his partner is a traitor to the cause, and also this kind of strange disconnect with his family, which is not realistic, right? It didn't reflect his own life, and it makes me think that the book is not necessarily supposed to be realistic, but perhaps it's drawing on this kind of parallel tradition that's going back to Russian radicalism, right? This idea that radical romantic tradition where the highest ideal was self-sacrifice, and that you wouldn't have a romantic partner. Suicide was very highly prized or romanticized, and that would kind of make sense if that is kind of in the mix for him as he's writing. I mean, what do you think? Is that there?
Yes, and this being my first translation project, it's been fun for me to get to know what my interests and agendas are. I don't read enough literature. In fact, the reason I don't have a degree in Russian is because I refused to take the classes that were literature and translation. So I haven't read a whole lot of Russian literature, but I did learn the term Bildungsroman from this project, which is relevant in Russian and Soviet literature. I came at it more from my history training and trying to connect the dots and read the archives of who is he, where is he living. Yeah.
Such a great question. So good. Like, what is informing the aesthetics?
Yeah, and what was he reading? Mm-hmm.
Other questions?
So I think we're at time.
We're time. Yay. Well, let's give a big round of applause for Annie Kaufman.